Exhausted from battling the unforgiving sea, Pedro Serrano collapsed on the shore, his limbs heavy with fatigue, yet his heart beat with the relief of survival. The wreckage of his ship had vanished beneath the relentless waves, leaving no trace behind. He lay there, scanning the horizon, anticipating the arrival of any fellow survivors. But as the sun dipped into the ocean, no one emerged from the water. Dawn broke with a new reality for Serrano. He explored the island that had become his unexpected refuge. It was substantial in size. A trek from one end to the other would take several hours. Yet the landscape was stark, a vast expanse of sand under the relentless sun. There were no trees, no greenery to offer shade, no streams or ponds to quench his thirst. This island was nothing but a sandy desert, isolated from the world. Despair seeped into his bones as he realized his predicament. It was the 1520s, an era when Spanish galleons frequently plied the waters of the Caribbean, but the ocean was vast, and this island was but a speck in it, insignificant and easily overlooked. The chances of rescue seemed as distant as the horizon itself. However, he shook off these dark premonitions. The urgency of survival took precedence. He desperately needed food and water. After an exhaustive search, he discovered some mollusks and crawling insects, which he ate raw, as he had no means to ignite a fire. Later that day, his luck seemed to change as he witnessed giant turtles lumbering onto the beach from the sea. He sprinted to them, swiftly flipping them onto their backs. Their limbs flailed comically in the air. With the knife he always carried at his waist, he pierced their flesh. He drank their blood with parched eagerness, then carved out chunks of meat to desiccate in the scorching sun. Later, he repurposed the large shells to collect rainwater, pondering if perhaps he could subsist in this lonely expanse. As days turned into weeks, Serrano's ingenuity grew. He fashioned tools from the bones of the turtles, creating hooks for fishing and scraping the last bits of meat from the bones for sustenance. He noticed that by setting out the turtle shells in a specific pattern, he could maximize rainwater collection during the rare showers. After several weeks, Serrano had amassed a good supply of dried turtle meat and water. His thoughts now turned to fire. Driftwood often washed up on his shores, but starting a fire was the real challenge. Back in Spain, he would use stones and a knife to create a spark. But here, the island offered no such stones. Was fire out of reach? Serrano, however, was not one to give up easily. He decided to swim beyond the shallows, diving under the waves in search of the right stones. Day after day, he combed the ocean floor, his lungs burning with each dive. At last, his persistence paid off. He discovered a cache of suitable stones not far from the shore. He ferried them back to his island bit by bit, his muscles aching from the effort. Once he had his stones, he set to work. He struck one stone against another, chipping away until they had the sharp edges needed. He then tore his shirt into small strips. Holding his knife under these pieces, he struck it repeatedly with the stones until sparks caught on the fabric, igniting it. The shirt, now aflame, was used to light the waiting wood. Triumphantly, Serrano had his fire. He tended to the fire meticulously, feeding it with whatever the tide brought in. For shelter, he ingeniously used the largest turtle shells to form a roof, protecting himself from the occasional downpour. With his fire and shelter sorted, all he had to do was wait for rescue. It wasn't long before he spotted sails on the horizon. First one ship passed, then another, but his smoke signals seemed to go unnoticed. Or maybe the sailors were wary of the treacherous rocks surrounding his island. Time dragged on. Months turned into years. With each passing day, Serrano's hope flickered like his fire in the wind. 3 years into his solitary existence on the island, Pedro Serrano lay asleep, enveloped by the quiet of the night. Nothing suggested that this night would mark a change in his lonely life. However, unbeknownst to him, a ship was battling the stormy seas not far from his island. Before long, it succumbed to the jagged rocks and was torn apart. Its sole survivor, desperate for life, swam through the dark waters towards the island, guided by the faint light of dawn. As morning broke, the sailor, his body weary from the ordeal, saw the smoke rising from Serrano's fire. "My comrades from the ship have made it here as well," he exclaimed with joy, his spirits lifting as he trudged toward the smoke, hopeful for reunion. But instead of familiar faces, he encountered Serrano, a figure more beast than man, wild-eyed, unclothed, and covered with a mane of long, tangled hair. The sailor, taken aback by this feral apparition, felt a surge of fear. Simultaneously, Serrano, catching sight of another human after so long, was struck with terror. "This must be an illusion. I'm losing my mind," he thought, panic rising within him. He fled, shouting, "Save me, Jesus!" his voice echoing through the island's silence. The mention of Jesus calmed the sailor's fright. "Come back, brother," he shouted after Serrano. "We share the same faith." Yet, Serrano, still caught in the grip of disbelief and fear, did not halt his escape. Their chase continued, weaving through the sparse landscape of the island, Serrano darting between dunes and rocks, the sailor following with determination. But eventually, the reality of their shared plight dawned on Serrano. Overcome with the realization that this man was not a figment, but a fellow human in distress, he stopped, turned, and with tears streaming down his face, embraced the sailor in a tight, desperate hug. The two men, now companions in solitude, sat by the fire where they shared their stories. The sailor spoke of the sudden storm, the ship's last moments, and his swim to the island, while Serrano recounted his years of loneliness, his survival tactics, and his moments of near madness. They laughed and cried, finding solace in each other's company, their voices echoing across the island where only silence had reigned before. In the subsequent months, the two castaways coexisted, their days filled with foraging for food and collecting firewood. They meticulously managed their rainwater collection using turtle shells and kept a vigilant watch over their precious fire. "If that flame dies, our chance for rescue vanishes with it," Serrano would remind his companion. However, their harmony was short-lived. Friction arose as each accused the other of shirking responsibilities. In a fit of anger, they decided to part ways, dividing the island into separate territories. For months, silence was their only communication, the island's solitude now doubled by their estrangement. Eventually, the folly of their feud dawned on them. With apologies and a newfound appreciation for companionship, they reconciled. They lived together for another 4 years, their bond strengthening in adversity. Despite their efforts, ships sailed by without stopping. Despair set in, and they contemplated a life sentence on the island, occasionally wishing for an end to their suffering. But just when their hope was extinguished, a ship on the horizon spotted their smoke signal. It dispatched a small boat to investigate. The two men, wild with joy, danced erratically on the beach as the boat approached. However, the sailors aboard were initially alarmed by the sight of two disheveled, unkempt figures, fearing they might be encountering some savage or mythic creatures. They hesitated, ready to turn back. In a moment of desperation, Serrano and his companion shouted, "In the name of Jesus, save us!" This plea, invoking a common faith, allayed the sailors' fears, compelling them to come ashore. Once aboard the rescue vessel, the two men savored the luxury of real food and fresh water, sharing tales of their island saga to an intrigued audience. The joy of human interaction after so long was indescribable. The journey back to civilization was bittersweet. Tragically, Serrano's companion succumbed to illness before reaching Europe, leaving Serrano to mourn his friend. But Serrano made it back to Spain, where his story of survival and solitude turned him into a local celebrity. His adventures were recounted in books and ballads, and he lived out his days in wealth. His legacy, a testament to human endurance. Back in Spain, Serrano was not just celebrated, but also sought advice from explorers and sailors, becoming somewhat of a mentor. He used his fame to fund expeditions, hoping to aid those lost at sea. He even authored a guide on survival techniques for castaways, which became a valuable resource for generations of sailors. His life, once marked by solitude, now influenced many, ensuring his name would echo through history long after his death as a wealthy, respected man. And so, Pedro Serrano's incredible journey comes to an end. What would you do if you found yourself stranded on a deserted island? Could you have survived like Pedro Serrano? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your survival ideas. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating tales of history, adventure, and survival.